Welcome to the first ever episode of my podcast. This is the Science of Living working title. We may find something different to call it, but we're going to go with that from now. And so this is the first episode where we're going to tell the real stories of real people dealing with some of the common health issues that we all deal with every day. We're going to dive into the science of those health issues and give you the practical advice we all need to make changes. This is the science of how to live a little bit better every day, how to hack your life with new information, plus practical guidance from a doctor who lives it, aka me. I'm Dr. Robin Berzin. I'm the founder and CEO of Parsley Health. And this podcast is brought to you by Parsley Health. We are a game-changing new medical practice across the country and currently New York, LA, and San Francisco, where we integrate nutrition, wellness, and prevention with cutting-edge medical care. So check it out. So I want to welcome you to today's topic. And the first topic that we're taking on is called Pregnant After 30. Yes, it sounds familiar. It might sound familiar to you. It's absolutely familiar to me, having had my first baby this year, just about 8 months ago. And I took on this topic because I think this is an interesting and relevant topic to our society as a whole. We have a population in which the rates of birth are going down for everyone under 30, and the rates of birth are going significantly up in everyone over 30. It's the only population in which U.S. births are increasing, even though our overall birth rate as of 2017 is at an all-time low, and the age at first pregnancy is at an all-time high. And so what is that? This has led to is a $4 billion in vitro fertilization industry. And in IVF costs about $10,000 to $20,000 per cycle and only has about a 30% success rate in women over 30. And so we're going to kind of get into IVF and reproductive endocrinology and all these things a little bit today. But to back it up for a second, this industry has been created in many ways because so many of us are having babies later. And I had my first baby at 36, so I can absolutely speak to that. And so I work with a lot of patients at Parsley, and our other physicians across the country do too, who are women. And women in their 30s are waiting longer and longer to get pregnant and have a lot more choices around pregnancy than they used to. There's a lot more decisions to make. There's a lot more information out there. We're going to do a whole different story and podcast on egg freezing. That's a whole different topic. But today we're just going to talk about pregnant after 30 and what that means and what you should know. And how to arm yourself with a little bit more information so that you're prepared, as many of us, more and more of us, are making this big life transition a little bit later in life. But before we get to that, I want to talk about one of my patients. Her name is Laura. And her story is also on our blog at Parsley Health. She's told it herself. These are her words. But she's a woman who came to us at about 34 years old, so sort of right in the prime of the time that a lot of women are getting pregnant these days. She had a history of thyroid disease and something called polycystic ovarian syndrome. And so before she came to see us, she had been told that she would need IVF by her primary care doctor, by her OBGYN, and by 2 reproductive endocrinologist specialists. And so she came to us for her sort of general health and to optimize her thyroid and to learn a little bit more. But what was interesting was, as we began to work with her, fertility, which wasn't the thing that she came in for, ended up being the focus. And so I'm just going to read a little bit from her story, and then I'm going to talk about how we handled her situation and what we learned. So Laura says, I was vaguely diagnosed with PCOS, polycystic ovarian syndrome, when I was 19 and prescribed the blanket treatment given by most gynecologists of a hormonal birth control pill. Through the team at Parsley Health, I was able to get on the right supplements and make the necessary dietary changes to manage my PCOS. But then I actually began to worry about fertility. I was worried that it was going to take me years to get pregnant, as it had taken several years to get to a point where I was feeling good with my thyroid levels and my hormones. 10 months later, I was staring at a positive pregnancy test. So this is an incredible story, and we'll have Laura on the show going down the road. But what we learned in her situation is that don't always believe what you hear, and that her story is all too familiar, and that a lot of women are being told that they need to do IVF and that there's no other way, without anyone really looking under the hood and asking, why can't you get pregnant? Or is there something else we can do? And, I think the reason that happens today is because, OBGYNs, as highly educated and well-meaning as they most often are, spend a few minutes with people, and they do their pap smear and they do their basic guidance, and these are 10 or 15-minute visits. They're really not equipped to spend the meaningful time with a patient to understand what's going on with them underneath the hood and to help them get pregnant potentially naturally, nor do they have that training. And so what's happening is women are going as what I call this 0 to IVF moment, where no one is looking under the hood and asking, why can't someone get pregnant? And in a world where, as I've said, and as the data is showing, we're increasing the number of women who are getting pregnant over 30, we need to take a beat. We need to take a pause, I think, and ask why a woman is having a hard time, give her more time in some cases. And while, again, IVF and IUI and some of these fertility services are absolutely amazing, we're very grateful that they exist, they're not necessary or appropriate for most people. And so I think Laura's story is really instructive of that, because it tells us that someone who was told by 4 different doctors that she would have to get IVF, and though the only way that she would get pregnant was staring at a positive pregnancy test, in her words, after 10 months of just optimizing her hormones. And so there's a lot of reasons that women have impaired fertility, as it's known. It's not infertility, meaning they absolutely cannot get pregnant, but it's called impaired fertility. And that's about 7 million women in the United States. It's 12% of women. And it's a big number. And there's a lot of different reasons for this. There's something called PCOS, as we just discussed, called polycystic ovarian syndrome, which is really just a syndrome. It's like a constellation of symptoms. And we could do a whole podcast on PCOS. It's not actually a disease. But it's mainly a metabolic issue, actually. And for many women, it can be fixed and solved through food. There's also endometriosis, which is an autoimmune condition where endometrial lining tissue grows places it's not supposed to be, and women have really heavy periods or problematic periods, sometimes cysts. There's something called hypothalamic hypopituitary function, right? And this is where the brain and the ovaries are not talking to each other in the right way. And we'll get into a little bit why that might be. There's premature ovarian failure. So women who are going into early menopause, or whose ovaries stop working far earlier than menopause. And actually the skyrocketing number of women with autoimmune disease is a big part of this, or one part of this. 78% of autoimmune disease is in women, and that number is going up as well. And then, of course, there's older age. So older than 35, let's face it, we all know that women are born with all the eggs that they're going to have for their entire life. And then those eggs slowly deplete over their lifetime. And after 35, statistically, and of course, everyone is different, but after 35, egg availability goes way down. And so we have an industry around IVF, and that's posed for a lot of women as the only solution. And I'm here to posit and to tell stories about how that's not always the case. And I just try to remind our patients at Parsley, whoever works with us at Parsley, whether it's one of our other physicians or myself, that some of these fertility treatments aren't benign, right? They have side effects like bloating and mood imbalances and ovarian swelling and risk of an ovarian torsion, which is where the blood supply to the ovary gets cut off. There's also a much higher likelihood of multiple births, so twins, triplets, about 40%. And so, as I can attest, having one baby is enough of a life change. Having twins is a whole nother ballgame. So none of these things have to happen. IVF and these other fertility services don't have to be a bad thing. They can be a great thing. But I do think that given the cost, given the side effects, given the likelihood of multiples and what that can mean for a family, we have to start looking at other solutions. We have to start looking a little bit deeper at what's going on with women before we resort to some of these treatments. So we need to start asking why. So as I said, there is PCOS and autoimmune disease and endometriosis and hypothalamic dysfunction. And the interesting thing about all of these conditions that women can have that can contribute to impaired fertility is that they're all in some way dictated or influenced by what you eat. So we have a population that's living on a highly refined, high sugar, high carb, high processed food diets called the SAD, Standard American Diet, SAD. And it's what most people are eating. Even people who think they're eating healthy are eating a high number of grams of sugar per day, higher than they should be, higher than a 25 gram max we all should be having at most They're not getting enough fiber, and they're not getting enough greens, they're not getting enough vegetables, they're not getting enough healthy fats. And they're living on this refined diet. And we actually know that that can cause things like PCOS, trigger autoimmune disease, fuel endometriosis, and impact the connection between the brain and the ovaries. And so what we need to do, and when somebody who comes and is having trouble getting pregnant or is having irregular cycles or carries a diagnosis of one of these conditions, is start testing and start looking a little bit deeper than the standard testing that a regular doctor would do at things that, we do it certainly at Parsley Health, and that other doctors who work the way do look at. And women, I think, should be educated to ask their doctors to look at more so. So first of all, we want to look at a thyroid panel. We want to look at your thyroid hormones in depth, because if your thyroid is off, your ovaries and your sex hormones can be off. You can also have a higher risk of miscarriage, harder time sustaining a pregnancy. We want to look at blood sugar and insulin levels, because we know that, again, polycystic ovarian syndrome, for instance, is a metabolic condition where eating too much sugar and refined carbs can actually drive the process. When your sugar goes up, your insulin goes up. When your insulin goes up, your testosterone goes up. When testosterone goes up, testosterone's changed into estrogen, and you now have this flow that has completely disrupted your natural hormone balance. We also want to look at cortisol levels, which is looking at adrenal function. The adrenals are these two little glands that sit on top of your kidneys, and they pump out a few hormones, including cortisol. We call them the king of the hormones. So adrenals are king, we always say, because if they're dysfunctional, then they can make the rest of the hormones, including thyroid and sex hormones, dysfunctional. So if your cortisol is really high all day, that can create a phenomenon called progesterone or cortisol steal, which depletes your progesterone, and that can impact your ability to get pregnant. We also know that we need to look at genomics and test certain genes that include those that process your estrogen levels and help you detoxify. There's so much we now know about genomics, and when you are thinking about getting pregnant, often women have a genetic screening that's looking for congenitally inherited defects that you might pass on to the baby. But there's also a lot of genetic information that we can get today that looks at what is going on with you before you get pregnant to help you actually address those. And these are things you can address. Of course, we want to look at sex hormones like testosterone and progesterone, sex hormone binding globulin, and we want to see what they're doing in relationship to each other. So it's not enough just to test day 3 hormones the way that a fertility doctor would. We also want to look at day 21, which is the 21st day of your cycle. Day 1 is the first day of your period. Day 21 is around the luteal phase, or should be anyway, and it can tell us a lot what the estrogen to progesterone ratio is at that time. We also want to look at the bugs in your gut, known as the microbiome. So we now know a lot about microbiota, the bugs inside of us that live in and on us, how they control our immune system. One of the things that they do is process our estrogens, and certain factors like beta-glucuronidase can result in estrogen circulating around and around. High estrogen states can feed endometriosis. There's so much there to look at. There's also inflammation. So inflammation is the chronic activation of the immune system. We can look at markers of that. We can look at your vitamin D level, which is an important marker for inflammation. We can look at your omega-3 fatty acid status, which could help you balance inflammation. And finally, heavy metals. So we are inundated today, especially with mercury. Mercury from coal burning has dropped into the oceans and affected our seafood supply, especially big fatty fish like tuna and swordfish. But there's quite a few. The NRDC, Natural Resources Defense Council, has a great PDF on high mercury fish. And so we know that we're eating, in many cases, too much mercury. There's mercury in those old gray metal fillings that people don't tend to have anymore, but used to. I actually still have a couple. And before I got pregnant, a couple years before, I actually tested and had higher mercury levels stored in my body, not just in the blood. And I spent 6 weeks chelating, or pulling out those heavy metals through a process. And we'll do a whole podcast on chelation and what's up with that. But there's so much testing that we can do to understand and optimize how you're doing. And then using that testing, we can address things like poor digestion, cortisol steal, again, which is depleting of your progesterone through high cortisol levels, We can address insomnia. Insomnia, actually, one bad night of sleep leads to metabolic disarray the next day, almost if you had pre-diabetes. So it makes you insulin insensitive and ups blood sugar. We can look at your sugar and alcohol and caffeine levels. We understand that these foods that are common, this is what everybody's eating and taking in every day, can wildly disrupt your metabolic balance and disrupt your hormones. And then we can look at things like sympathetic overdrive. Are you living in fight or flight? Are you running in emergency from the moment you wake up to the moment you go to bed? All of these things actually impact your sex hormones and, in fact, your fertility. And so what we need to be doing, I think, for women who are getting pregnant over 30 is taking a big step back, taking a moment, and asking first, how do you feel? If you feel like crap, well, you might not have as easy a time as you'd like getting pregnant. We need to do some of the testing that I just mentioned and look at how are the body systems functioning together? What are the toxin levels? Are there heavy metals? Are there inflammatory markers? Maybe there's things that we can adjust. We need to adjust the diet. So that's what I call feeding your hormones. Using the right foods, healthy fats, lots of fiber, greens, good protein, getting rid of a lot of those sugars and refined carbs we're all sort of addicted to feed your hormones, because you actually can feed your hormones in the right way and so they can work for you. Detoxify your system, so get your digestion moving, get rid of those heavy metals, make sure you're sweating every day. And then de-stressing the mind, getting you out of that sympathetic overdrive, that fight or flight emergency mode where your catecholamines, your epinephrine's through the roof, and your body never gets to relax and tell itself that it's safe to be pregnant. And then repleting micronutrients. So there's a lot of micronutrients like vitamin D, like omega-3 fatty acids, like even things like magnesium, iron, zinc, selenium, things that are really iodine, really important for the thyroid to work, for the sex hormones to be produced. These are all things we can do. And then there's the whole realm of medications. And the first one I always say for women under 30, we spend so much time trying not to get pregnant. And what we need to be doing is also doing a little bit of family planning and getting prepared. So I see a lot of women who come and they've been on the pill for 10, 15, 20 years, the birth control pill, which means that they haven't been getting a real period. Their menstrual cycle's been stopped and it's been covered up by the birth control pill. It's important to remember that your period when you're on the pill is not a real period. And so for those women, I highly recommend getting off of the pill, especially if you're over 30, at least 6 months before you want to get pregnant, at least 6 months, because this is what I see happen all the time. Women have been on the pill forever. They stop the pill and they say, all right, I'm ready to get pregnant. And what they do is uncover the Pandora's box of hormonal dysfunction that's happening underneath the surface. And even working with doctors like us at Parsley, it can take months sometimes to re-regulate the system so that you're able to get pregnant. You've also been taking a synthetic form of estrogen and sometimes progesterone for a really long time. I recommend getting some of these synthetic hormones out of your system so that you're not, exposing your baby as well. There's also the medications that you've been on that maybe you can't be on. So a lot of people are now taking antidepressants and sometimes drugs like stimulants. A lot of these medications you unfortunately can't stay on while you're pregnant. They're not well studied or they're known to be problematic. I see more and more women, told that, just take these medications while you're pregnant, even though the research is not there that they're safe. So in some cases where possible, you might want time to titrate down slowly off of the medications that you're on so that it's safe to get pregnant. There's also lots of things that we can do to support the hormones, and sometimes that does involve supplements or medication. Herbal medications like chaste tree berry can actually help support progesterone levels and lower prolactin levels and get you back into a routine cycle. We use it and it works. Sometimes we'll use a bioidentical progesterone cream, and we'll use that for about 10 to 14 days out of the month every month to help support a woman's cycle or get it back to normal if she hasn't been cycling. And it can work really, really well. We'll also support your thyroid. If your thyroid's low, you should be on thyroid hormone support. And then sometimes supplements to regulate gut health, probiotics, fiber, prebiotics. These are things that can regulate your digestion and then therefore help regulate your hormones as well. And the last thing I always say for over 30, again, we spend so much time trying not to be pregnant, right? Maybe, or a lot of us do anyway. I certainly did. I took the birth control pill for years, and then I had an IUD. The nice thing about the IUD is that it doesn't stop you from ovulating. So you're actually able to, your regular cycle is happening even though you have a pretty secure form of birth control. It's as good or better as the birth control pill. And that's really nice because then at least you know that your system has been working while you've been on birth control. But I had both, and so many of our patients come in and they've been on these things for so long, and they've sort of been so focused on that they forgot to focus on, well, what about getting pregnant? And I do have women come in all too often. They've put it out of their minds. They're 35, they're 36, they're 37. And now, again, because simply statistically, for most of us, our egg supply significantly decreases and egg quality has significantly decreased over 35, that we can't always totally beat our biology. And so even though all these other things can certainly help improve our own health and set us up for a healthy pregnancy, you want to make sure that you have the eggs to get there. And so for women who maybe haven't found their partner yet, or are thinking in different ways about how they want to plan a family, however that looks for you, partner, no partner, whoever that partner might be, whatever the support you need, it doesn't matter. Start thinking about it sooner, because you don't want to start thinking about it when it's too late. And that I see unfortunately happen more and more. So there's so much you can do. There's so much you can do to have a healthy pregnancy over 30. And we'll be doing more Facebook Lives around this topic so you can ask your questions. And we'll dive into this topic even more on future podcasts where we'll have some guests, some experts in reproductive endocrinology, and also some stories of women who have been able to kind of beat the odds like Laura and get pregnant naturally, even though they were told they'd never be able to, and share how gratifying that was. But hopefully this has been an opportunity for you to think more deeply about what it means to be pregnant over 30, and to think about this is an issue that millions of us are increasingly facing. If you're not facing it now, you might be later. Maybe you have a daughter who is, maybe your partner is, maybe your friends are. This affects all of us. And so that is just a deep dive into some of the latest science on what we can do to help improve our chances of having healthy pregnancy over 30. So this is Dr. Robin Berzin. I'm the host of Working Title, The Science of Living, our new podcast, and this is brought to you by Parsley Health. Again, Parsley Health is an alternative to primary care where we focus on nutrition, wellness, and prevention, along with cutting-edge testing, things like the microbiome and hormones and toxins, all the kinds of tests that you wish your regular doctor did, but they don't. We have centers in New York, San Francisco, and LA today, and you should visit us there and sign up to work with one of our amazing physicians and health coach teams. If you're not in New York, SF, or LA, please find us and sign up for our newsletter. We go through content like this in depth, share this podcast, and listen to it coming up. We're going to be taking on a lot more topics so that you are equipped with the information you need to live a little bit better every day. Okay, bye. Hmm. No, it's 9 o'clock and my throat is dry and